Service drinks, ape. The words cracked through the grand ballroom like a whip. Laughter followed, high-pitched and glittering, as if cruelty was part of the evening's entertainment. Chandeliers trembled above rows of crystal glasses, violins faltered in the corner, and for a moment the luxury itself seemed tainted. She froze not out of fear, but because she had predicted this exact moment. The black woman in the white off-shoulder gown, standing with a phone in hand, looked nothing like the staff. She looked like calm fire contained in silk. Yet to the circle of billionaires draped in tuxedos and gowns, she was invisible, reduced to a punchline, mistaken for the help. The blonde in red leaned back, lips curling, glass of wine tilted dangerously. "Don't just stand there. Do your job." More laughter. Her companions smirked as if mocking were a game, as if money bought them the right to humiliate strangers. And still, the woman in white said nothing. Her fingers brushed the stem of her empty glass. She glanced at her phone, eyes narrowed just slightly like a storm reading its own forecast. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Amara Lewis. Her silence was deliberate. She had heard words like these before. At 19, when she tried to enter a scholarship gala wearing a borrowed dress, a guard blocked her path, saying, "Service entrance is around back." At 27, pitching her first hotel acquisition, a banker told her, "You'd be more convincing in housekeeping uniform." Now at 42, in a ballroom she technically paid for, the same venom surfaced again, delivered by people who thought their laughter could erase her worth. Guests nearby shifted uncomfortably. One young server, balancing a tray of champagne flutes, froze mid-step, eyes wide. A man near the pillars raised his phone slightly, tempted to capture the moment, but Amara gave the faintest shake of her head. Not yet. Not this way. The air grew heavier. The violinists avoided eye contact, bowing their strings softly as if silence could protect them. The family of billionaires leaned closer, emboldened. A man in a black tux whispered loud enough for half the room to hear, "She probably slipped past security." "Wrong room, sweetheart." Another voice added, "Look at her dress. No diamonds, no designer tag. Must be staff trying to blend in." The cruelty wasn't just in the words, it was in the assumption that she could be dismissed, erased, laughed out of existence. But Amara didn't flinch. She had learned long ago, the most dangerous weapon in any room was patience. She lifted her glass slowly, as if answering their taunt by doing nothing at all. Her reflection in the crystal was calm, sharp, and unbroken. The party thought it was mocking a servant. What it didn't know was that it was mocking its owner. And Amara Lewis, CEO, investor, the silent architect of the very deal being toasted tonight, was about to turn their laughter into ashes. Amara Lewis had chosen her armor carefully. Not diamonds, not designer embroidery, not the armor of excess. Just a white gown, clean, deliberate, quiet. A gown that whispered instead of shouted. She stepped into the gala alone. No entourage, no flashing cameras, no whispering assistants trailing her with tablets. She entered like any other guest might, and that was the point. Tonight, she wanted to see the truth of this family, unmasked by contracts or courtesy. The ballroom was a cathedral of money. Velvet drapes spilled like rivers of blood down marble columns. Waiters glided between clusters of laughter, carrying silver trays that caught the chandelier's light. Champagne popped like gunfire in the distance, each cork a celebration of privilege. At the center of it all stood the Vandenbergs, the billionaire dynasty hosting the evening, old money dressed in new arrogance. Their smiles were wide, their laughter louder than the string quartet, their circle impenetrable until Amara walked too close. That was when the insult was thrown, not by accident, not in jest, but with the ease of people who had always believed themselves untouchable. To everyone else, Amara looked like a guest waiting for her drink. To the Vandenbergs, she was an intruder in silk. They couldn't see her name on the contract that secured tonight's $5 billion merger. They couldn't see her hand on the pen that decided whether this deal lived or died. They only saw what they wanted to see: skin, dress, silence, and in their eyes, it was enough. She let their laughter roll over her. It wasn't new. At 25, she had walked into a London boardroom with her first real estate acquisition proposal. A man twice her age patted her shoulder like a child and said, Leave this to the serious investors. At 33, she watched bankers flip through her hotel chain projections without reading, one of them smirking, "Ambitious, too ambitious for someone like you." But she turned every dismissal into steel, every smirk into fire, every insult into a stepping stone. Now, she stood in their ballroom, perfectly still, holding the power they thought they owned. Guests whispered as she passed, some curious, some skeptical. A man in a navy suit muttered, "Who's she with?" A woman in emerald earrings whispered back, "Doesn't matter. Not one of us." Amara heard it all. She didn't react. She didn't need to. Her phone vibrated once, a gentle pulse against her palm. A reminder from her assistant waiting off-site. "Deal confirmation ready. Your word decides everything." She closed her eyes briefly, listening not to the music or the laughter, but to the weight of the moment. Tonight wasn't about champagne or chandeliers. Tonight was a test of who they really were and who she had become. The laughter didn't fade, it grew teeth. The blonde in red swirled her glass lazily, eyes narrowing. "Strange," she said, voice pitched high enough to carry across the marble floor. No diamonds, no invite card, standing alone in the middle of the room. "You sure you belong here?" Her companion, a man in a tuxedo with salt and pepper hair and the grin of inherited wealth, leaned in, his words dripping. "If you're looking for work, sweetheart, the staff door's that way." He gestured toward the service corridor without looking away, his smirk a weapon sharpened by privilege. Amara didn't move. She let the silence after his insult stretch, heavy, deliberate. Her eyes lingered on him as though she were filing away his name for later because she was. From the corner, another voice joined the chorus. A younger man, champagne in hand, tilted his head mockingly. "Maybe she crashed the party. These things happen. Security should check." He snapped his fingers like summoning a servant. "Manager!" The ballroom shifted. Heads turned. A ripple of curiosity and unease spread across the guests. A few chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or to distance themselves. The string quartet faltered again, bows hesitating on strings. And then came the manager, brisk steps on polished marble, a man in a black suit, tie tight, posture stiff. His smile was thin, his tone colder than the champagne. "Excuse me, ma'am. This section is reserved for invited guests. May I see your credentials?" The blonde folded her arms, satisfied. "See? Told you." "Hell." The man in the tux added with mock courtesy, "Don't take it personally. It's protocol." Amara looked at the manager, eyes calm, voice steady. "And if I don't?" The question landed harder than any refusal. The manager blinked, caught off guard by the weight behind the words. Before he could answer, the younger man with champagne chuckled again, louder this time, trying to reclaim control of the room. "Then she leaves. Simple as that." A low murmur rose around them. Some guests nodded, eager to see the scene resolved. Others frowned, sensing something wrong but unwilling to intervene. Near the pillars, the same young server from earlier stood frozen, tray trembling slightly in her hands. Her gaze darted between Amara and the circle of billionaires, lips pressed tight. She knew what was happening. She had seen it before. But saying something now could cost her job. Amara noticed her hesitation. One glance, one nod just enough to say, "Not yet. Wait." She turned back to the group, still unshaken. They saw a woman out of place. What they couldn't see was the storm tightening around them. The blonde leaned in one final time, her voice cutting. "We don't know who you are, and until you prove otherwise, you're nobody here." The words hung in the air, sharp as glass. Amara's fingers brushed her phone again, but she didn't raise it. Not yet. The game was escalating exactly as she had expected. The insult hovered like smoke that refused to fade, eyes locked on her, waiting for a reaction, anger, protest, maybe even shame. But Amara gave them nothing. She raised her glass, empty though it was, and set it gently on the nearest table. The sound of crystal against marble was soft, but in the charged silence, it rang louder than their laughter. Her shoulders stayed square, her gaze steady. She did not plead. She did not explain. She simply stood anchored, immovable, as if the weight of the entire room could not shift her center. The manager cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Ma'am, please cooperate. Show your credentials, and we can avoid unpleasantness." Amara didn't answer. She let the silence stretch until it made him fidget with his cufflinks. Silence was her weapon. It forced the guilty to reveal themselves. In that stillness, memories flickered like old film reels. She was 20 again, standing outside a boutique hotel in Atlanta, luggage in hand, told by the clerk that her reservation couldn't be found. She had slept in her car that night, humiliated but determined. She was 29, presenting her first major acquisition proposal, only to be told, "This is impressive. Did your boss put this together for you?" She was 35, wearing a tailored Navy suit, mistaken for the assistant when she was the one signing the checks. Every slight, every doubt, every dismissal had carved her into steel. And tonight, in this ballroom, she drew from that same reservoir of patience. The blonde in red scoffed, misreading her calm for weakness. "See? She has nothing." Her laugh was brittle now, cracking at the edges. The man in the tux nodded toward security at the door. "Escort her out. This is a private affair." But even as they tried to summon force, Amara's composure unsettled them. Her silence wasn't submission, it was defiance dressed in restraint. A ripple moved through the guests. A few whispered, "Why isn't she saying anything? Who just stands there like that? She's too calm." Near the back, a young couple exchanged glances, their discomfort visible. They didn't speak, but their eyes said what many were thinking. Something about this felt wrong. Amara finally shifted, not to defend herself, but to glance at the server still frozen by the pillar. The girl clutched her tray like a shield, breathing fast. Amara's gaze softened, a silent message. "Hold on. Let them show themselves first." Then she looked back at her accusers, expression unreadable. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't move toward the door. She simply stood, calm as stone, while their arrogance piled higher layer upon layer of assumption, building toward collapse. The patience that unsettled boardrooms was now unraveling a ballroom. And though they thought they were winning, the truth was simple. The longer Amara stayed silent, the more the room itself began to question who truly held power. It started quietly. A phone tilted, almost invisible, near the marble pillar. A young man in a charcoal blazer, maybe late 20s, raised his camera just enough to catch the circle forming around Amara. His thumb hovered over record, his jaw clenched. This wasn't entertainment to him, it was evidence. Across the room, a young woman in a black uniform stood frozen. A server, no more than 22, her tray trembling with untouched champagne. She had seen arrogance before, but never like this. Her eyes darted from Amara's steady frame to the faces mocking her, and back again. She knew what injustice looked like. She lived in its shadow. The manager noticed the phone and barked, "Put that away. This is private property." His voice carried, sharp and defensive. But it was too late. Whispers had already begun to ripple through the ballroom. At one of the high tables, an older couple exchanged looks. The man muttered, "This feels wrong." The woman placed her hand on his arm, whispering back, "It's always the same. They think no one notices." The blonde in red lifted her chin, trying to reclaim control. "Don't make a scene. She doesn't belong here." But her words landed differently now. Instead of laughter, they drew silence, a silence that felt heavier than any jeer. The young man with the phone finally spoke, voice firm but not loud. "She hasn't done anything." He didn't aim his words at Amara, he aimed them at the accusers. The room shifted. Heads turned. For the first time, the balance cracked. Amara didn't stop him. She didn't nod, didn't encourage. She simply let his words hang beside hers. Silence, patience, defiant. The server by the pillar swallowed hard, then took a small step forward. Not much, just enough to show she was listening, watching. Her lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but fear held her back. Amara caught her eye and gave the smallest shake of her head. "Not yet. Truth will reveal itself." The tuxedoed man scoffed, sensing his grip loosening. "Typical," he sneered, "always looking for sympathy." He turned to the manager. "Call security now." But the manager hesitated. Something about the calm in Amara's stance, the quiet rebellion in the air, unsettled him. He adjusted his tie, his authority beginning to fray. Around the room, more phones appeared, subtle but undeniable. A glow of screens rose like fireflies in the dark. Witnesses were no longer whispering, they were archiving. And though Amara had asked for silence, though she hadn't lifted a single word in her defense, the room itself had begun to speak for her. One man's chuckle faltered. Another woman's smirk slipped. The laughter that had once drowned her presence was shrinking into the corners of the ballroom. The shift was fragile, almost imperceptible. but it was there. People were no longer laughing with the Vandenbergs. They were watching them, judging them, recording them. Amara stood at the center, untouched. Not triumphant, not yet. But the first cracks of doubt had formed, and she could feel the tide turning. And the family mocking her didn't even notice the storm rising behind their own guests. The murmurs rising in the ballroom only seemed to sharpen the arrogance of the hosts. The man in the tuxedo silver hair, jaw tight with irritation, snapped his fingers at the manager. Enough. Remove her. His voice carried, loud enough for the quartet to stop playing mid-note. The silence it left behind was heavy, bruising. The manager stiffened, torn between duty and doubt. But the blonde in red leaned closer, her perfume cloying, her tone venomous. She's embarrassing us. Do it now, before this circus grows. Her words sparked a ripple of agreement within their circle. Another relative, younger and sharper, chimed in, "This is a closed event. You don't belong. You've hijacked our party long enough." His laugh was hollow, desperate. The guests shifted uneasily. Some looked away, unwilling to meet Amara's eyes. Others raised their phones higher, the glow of screens like quiet torches in the dark. The spectacle was no longer private, it was becoming public theater. The manager approached, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ma'am, I'll ask once more your invitation, please. If you cannot provide it, we will have to escort you outside." Still, Amara said nothing. Her calm was more unnerving than a scream. She stood rooted, gaze steady, her silence turning their demands into noise. The tuxedoed man sneered. "See? No proof. No card. She's a fraud." The blonde laughed, brittle, almost shrill now. "Or a thief. Probably slipped in here hoping to mingle with power she'll never touch." She raised her glass high as if to toast the humiliation. To parasites who mistake charity for status. Gasps fluttered through the crowd. Even some who had stood silent before frowned openly now. The young man with the phone took a step forward, voice firmer. "She hasn't disrupted anything. You're the ones making a scene." The tuxedoed man turned on him, face reddening. "Mind your place. Do you even know who we are?" The young man didn't back down. "Do you know who she is?" The question cracked the air like lightning. The circle stiffened, eyes narrowing, laughter dying on their lips. The manager's smile faltered. He tugged at his collar, caught in the tension. But before doubt could spread further, the blonde cut through it, her voice sharp. "Security!" Two guards near the entrance stirred, uncertain. They exchanged glances but did not move hesitation, born not of loyalty, but of the unease now thick in the room. Amara remained still, a statue carved from patience and restraint. She hadn't raised her hand, hadn't raised her voice, but already the balance was shifting. The family thought they were tightening the noose. What they didn't see was that each word, each insult, each command was a rope around their own necks. The manager took a breath, preparing to act, but even as he stepped forward, his voice cracked with something he hadn't felt all evening, uncertainty. "Ma'am," he said softer now, "please don't make this harder than it needs to be." But Amara's silence spoke louder than any plea. And in that moment, the ballroom wasn't waiting for her response, it was waiting for their collapse. The breaking point came with a single careless hand. The man in the tuxedo reached forward, snatched the untouched glass from the table beside Amara, and shoved it into her hand with a cruel smile. "There. At least make yourself useful. Serve us properly." "Ugh." The blonde clapped her hands, shrill laughter piercing the hall. "Finally, she's found her role." The glass trembled not in Amara's grip, but in the weight of the room itself. Guests gasped. A few whispered furiously, "Did he just?" The violins fell completely silent, bows frozen midair. Amara didn't move. She held the glass as if it were nothing more than air. Her expression didn't crack. She simply set it back down, slow and deliberate, the crystal kissing marble once more. But the Vandenbergs weren't finished. A younger cousin, drunk on champagne and privilege, stepped closer, sneer curling his lips. "She's ignoring us. Someone should show her the door." He grabbed at her arm, not hard, but enough to cross the line, enough to ignite the crowd's outrage. The young server dropped her tray with a crash. Champagne flutes exploded across the marble, the sound like gunfire. "Don't touch her," she blurted, voice trembling but loud enough for all to hear. The ballroom gasped, heads turned. The moment shattered. The tuxedoed man snapped at the girl. Stay out of this or you'll be unemployed by sunrise. But the damage was done. The silence that followed wasn't compliance, it was judgment. The audience of glittering gowns and tailored suits had become witnesses. Phones rose higher, cameras glowing, the air thick with the weight of exposure. The blonde's voice cracked, desperate to reclaim dominance. She doesn't belong here. She's an imposter. Call the police if you have to. Her words rang too loud, too harsh, a confession of fear disguised as authority. The guards at the door shifted, unsure. Their orders were clear, but their instincts rebelled. To drag a woman out under this scrutiny, in this calm defiance, felt less like protocol and more like a trap. Amara still hadn't spoken, still hadn't raised her voice, but her stillness had become unbearable. It was no longer the quiet of submission, it was the quiet before a storm. The young man with the phone took another step forward. Everyone sees it now. You're humiliating her because you think you can. But you can't hide this anymore. The blonde turned scarlet, her laughter cracking. Hide what? She's a fraud. But the words no longer convinced anyone. They hung limp, empty, desperate. And Amara. She stood with her hands free, her gown untouched, her gaze steady. She didn't need to defend herself. They had already condemned themselves. The ballroom felt less like a party now and more like a courtroom one where the verdict was already written, though the guilty didn't know it yet. And all it had taken was a stolen glass, a grabbed arm, and their own arrogance laid bare for the world to see. The ballroom was frozen, the echo of broken glass still vibrating in its marble bones. Amara stood untouched, steady, her silence no longer passive, but charged like the air before lightning. Then she moved, not quickly, not angrily, just a hand slipping into her clutch, fingers brushing her phone. She lifted it, pressed one button, and held it to her ear. Initiate the lock, she said, her voice low, measured. Effective immediately. On the other end, her assistant's reply was crisp, professional. Understood, Miss Lewis. The $5 billion contract is now frozen. Confirmation will be sent to all parties within the hour. The words weren't loud, but they cut deeper than any shout. The nearest guests gasped. Phones wavered mid-air. The blonde in red blinked rapidly, her smirk cracking. What did she just say? Whispered a man near the back. Amara lowered the phone, not explaining, not elaborating. She let the silence after her words sink in, heavier than before. The tuxedoed man tried to laugh it off. It came out hollow, strained. She's bluffing. Some scam, don't listen to her. But even as he spoke, his eyes darted nervously to the other guests, searching for agreement that never came. The young man with the phone steady now, emboldened, spoke again. That didn't sound like a bluff. That sounded like someone in charge. The blonde snapped, her voice shrill. She's nothing, just a gatecrasher with a prop phone. Amara didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her phone buzzed once, a notification lighting the screen. She turned it outward for a moment, just long enough for those nearby to see. Contract status. Locked. Merger suspended. Gasps spread like wildfire. A woman in emerald earrings clutched her husband's arm. Another guest whispered, "That's impossible. Unless..." The manager stumbled back half a step, his polished composure unraveling. He had heard of last-minute freezes, of board-level interventions, but never like this, never from someone standing quietly in his ballroom. The blonde's voice cracked again. Fake. It has to be fake. But her certainty was gone. Amara slid her phone back into her clutch, movements precise, unhurried. She glanced around the circle that had mocked her minutes earlier. Her gaze lingered on each of them, one by one, as if etching their faces into memory. Then, finally, she spoke again, her words calm, deliberate. Every deal has conditions. Tonight, yours just expired. The hush that followed was suffocating. Guests who had once laughed now stared, wide-eyed, caught between disbelief and awe. The violinists lowered their bows entirely, instruments silent witnesses to the storm breaking in the room. For the first time, the Vandenbergs looked less like royalty in their ballroom and more like defendants awaiting a verdict. And Amara, once mistaken for a servant, had begun her quiet trial against them. The blonde in red opened her mouth again, desperate to reclaim ground. You don't scare anyone. You're just... The majority shareholder, Amara interrupted, her voice calm, clear, carrying across the marble hall. The words struck like a stone dropped in still water. The ripples spread instantly. Conversations died mid-breath. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their light a second longer. Amara stepped forward, not hurried, not theatrical, just steady. Her gown trailed softly against the marble, her presence expanding with every step. "You mocked me," she continued, eyes sweeping the Vandenberg circle, "in a ballroom funded by my signature. You questioned whether I belonged at a party celebrating a deal I created. You asked who I was." Her pause was deliberate. Silence coiled tight around her words. "I am Amara Lewis, founder, investor, the architect of the $5 billion merger you've been bragging about all evening." Gasps broke the room. Phones lifted higher, capturing every second. Guests shifted closer, not away, drawn to the weight of her revelation. The tuxedoed man's mouth worked soundlessly, his certainty dissolving. The younger cousin who had grabbed her arm recoiled as though burned. The blonde's face drained of color, her laughter curdled into silence. The manager staggered back, words failing him. He had demanded credentials. He had demanded proof. And now proof stood taller than any paper he could have asked for. From the back of the room, someone whispered, "She owns it." The words spread like a current, repeated, amplified. "She owns it. She owns it." The young server who had dropped her tray clasped her hands to her chest, eyes wide not just in relief, but in awe. She had nearly lost her job defending Amara. Now she realized she had been standing on the right side of history. Amara lifted her chin, not smug, not shouting, only resolute. "You didn't insult a guest tonight. You insulted the owner of your future, and the future has already decided." The silence that followed was absolute. No laughter, no music, just the quiet collapse of arrogance, the sound of power shifting. And in that stillness, the Vandenbergs finally saw her not as a servant, not as an intruder, but as the force they could never erase. The revelation detonated in silence, and then the ballroom fractured. The tuxedoed man staggered back a step, his voice cracking. "No, that's not possible. She can't." His words collapsed under their own weight, drowned by the glow of 100 phones catching his panic from every angle. The blonde in red clutched her glass too tightly. Crystals shattered in her hand, shards glittering across the marble like fallen stars. Her laughter, once shrill and commanding, had withered into a strangled gasp. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, mascara smudging as disbelief carved itself into her face. The younger cousin who had grabbed Amara's arm recoiled so violently he nearly stumbled into a waiter. His arrogance evaporated in an instant, leaving only the pale ghost of entitlement. "We didn't know," he muttered desperately, voice too small for the room. "We didn't know." The manager's clipboard slipped from his grasp, papers scattering like confetti of humiliation. His polished composure collapsed. "Miss Lewis," he stammered, words falling apart. I wasn't informed, if I had known." But no one was listening to him anymore. The crowd had shifted. Where once there was laughter, now there was awe. Guests leaned forward, eyes wide, drawn to the center of gravity that was Amara Lewis. Applause broke suddenly from the back, a single pair of hands clapping, hesitant at first, then joined by another and another. Soon, a ripple of approval moved through the room. The young man with the phone stepped closer, voice loud, firm. "We're recording this. Everyone will see how you treated her." He turned his lens toward the pale faces of the Vandenbergs, then back to Amara. "And everyone will see who she really islanded." The young server by the pillar let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her eyes shone, lips trembling in something between relief and pride. She wasn't just watching anymore, she was witnessing. Gasps became whispers. Whispers became declarations. "She owns the deal. She froze the contract. She's the one in charge." The Vandenbergs' fortress of arrogance crumbled under the weight of exposure. Their mocking smiles were gone, replaced with horror. For the first time, they looked small in their own ballroom. Amara didn't bask in their collapse. She stood tall, expression unreadable, presence undeniable. The calm she had carried from the start hadn't wavered. It had only deepened. Every witness in the room understood the same truth now. The game had flipped. The mocked guest was the master. The powerful family were the fools. And no amount of denial could save them from the verdict already unfolding live, in the eyes and cameras of everyone present. Amara's phone vibrated again, a silent reminder waiting in her clutch. She drew it out with the same calm she had carried all night, tapped once, and lifted it to her ear. "Confirm termination," she said. 3 words, steady as stone. On the other end, her assistant's voice rang through, crisp, deliberate. "Confirmed. Effective immediately, the Vandenberg contract is cancelled. Access to all shared accounts, facilities, and assets is revoked. Legal audit begins tonight." The announcement wasn't shouted, yet it thundered louder than any orchestra. The ballroom went still. The tuxedoed man stumbled forward, desperation cracking his voice. "Wait, you can't." But the phone buzzed again, a second confirmation lighting the screen. "Deal status, terminated." The blonde in red dropped into a chair, her gown pooling like spilled wine around her feet. Her face had drained of color, lips trembling as though the words she wanted no longer existed. "5 billion, she whispered, her disbelief barely audible. The younger cousin buried his face in his hands. His arrogance had curdled into panic. "You don't understand, this was everything." The manager, sweat beading at his temple, tried to salvage himself. "Miss Lewis, please, I didn't mean—" Amara turned her gaze on him, cold, unblinking. "You meant every word. You enforced their prejudice as policy, and policy has consequences." His throat tightened. The clipboard at his feet felt heavier than chains. Then Amara spoke louder, not to him, but to the room. "As of this moment, the Vandenbergs no longer control this deal. They no longer control this ballroom. Their access ends here." The guests gasped. Screens lit up brighter, capturing every syllable, every second. Behind the Vandenbergs, the security guards' radios crackled. A voice confirmed, "Access cards disabled, clearance revoked." Both men froze, unsure where their loyalties lay now, but their silence told the truth. The power had shifted. Applause broke again, stronger this time. Not polite, not hesitant, this was thunderous, uncontainable. The young man with the phone raised it high. "It's done." She ended it. His words carried the awe of someone witnessing justice in real time. The young server stepped forward at last, no longer trembling. She stood closer to Amara now, her voice firm. "They tried to treat you like nothing, but everyone saw who you are." Amara's expression softened just slightly, enough to acknowledge the courage it had taken. The Vandenbergs sat in ruins, stripped of their certainty, their deal, their dignity. What minutes ago had been their stage was now their reckoning. And Amara, silent, steady, immovable, was the one who had written the verdict. The ballroom was no longer theirs. It belonged to silence, to witnesses, to truth that could not be undone. Amara stood at the center, her white gown unruffled, her voice calm but heavy as iron. "You thought humiliation was your power. You thought laughter could erase me. But power does not live in your insults. It lives in what cannot be taken away." She let her gaze sweep the room, from the pale faces of the Vandenbergs to the glowing screens raised high. Every eye was fixed on her, waiting for the final word. "You didn't lose a deal tonight," she said evenly. "You lost your dignity, and that is a debt you can never repay." Gasps trembled into silence. The blonde in red lowered her eyes, unable to meet the weight of the truth. The tuxedoed man's fists clenched at his sides, but no words came. They were powerless, their empire reduced to ash in a single evening. Amara turned, slow and deliberate, and began walking toward the exit. Guests parted for her without a word, their admiration palpable. Some clapped softly, others whispered her name, but no one dared to stop her. At the edge of the ballroom, she paused once more. She didn't look back at those who had mocked her. She spoke to the witnesses instead. "Record this if you must. Share it if you want. But know this, I don't need a camera to prove my worth. I am the result. I am the evidence." Her words landed like the closing of a gavel, final and irreversible. The young server, standing straighter now, whispered under her breath, "That's power." The crowd exhaled as one, the tension breaking at last. Amara stepped into the corridor beyond, her heels clicking softly against marble, each step a quiet declaration that justice had been served. Behind her, the ballroom would never be remembered for the laughter of the Vandenbergs. It would be remembered for the night they were unmasked, stripped of arrogance, and left with nothing but shame. And Amara Lewis, silent, calm, unshaken, walked away, not as a guest, but as the architect of their downfall.